Sweat, which is the play that I've written for the commission, really came about when I began asking questions about how poverty was reshaping the American narrative. I was really interested in what I think is one of the big revolutions, which is the de-industrial revolution, which is really changing the landscape of America. Suddenly you have this incredible erosion of the middle class, and without the middle class you really lose a lot of your tax base, and without that tax base we really see a lot of these smaller cities beginning to crumble and disappear and lose their identity. And so when I began researching Sweat, I was very much interested in cities like that, cities that had once been these industrial powerhouses but had lost their factories, and then as a result lost their tax break, and then as a result lost their downtowns, and what was happening to the people who were living in these cities, what were the struggles of the people living in these cities. And so I decided to begin my research in a city called Reading, Pennsylvania, which is in southeast Pennsylvania. There's nothing really to distinguish it from many other cities other than the fact that it used to be the center of the Reading Railroad, and it's where a lot of industry passed through in the early and mid 20th century. But in the late 70s and early 80s, and through the 90s and through 2000, they began to lose their industrial base. A lot of the factories, steel factories and textiles factories closed, and suddenly they went from being the solidly working class, vibrant city to being a city that really had lost its identity. And I went to Reading in 2011, which was sort of right in the midst of the economic collapse in the United States. And I went armed with this question, which is, how would you define your city? And what I found when I asked people that is they always said Reading was. They always spoke of their city in past tense, and that really made me quite sad, because I thought a city that can't imagine itself in present tense or in future tense really is going to have a struggle with identity in the future. And so I went to Reading and began to just ask a lot of questions of people, from the mayor to the police chief to people who were working in corrections, to people who were working in the schools, and people who were working on farms, and people who were homeless, and people who ran businesses, trying to get a sense of what was the narrative of this city. And what I found is that it really had been corrupted, is that everyone was struggling regardless of whether they had some level of financial security or whether they were homeless. All of them were struggling because they felt that their city wasn't cohesive. I think something that's really lovely that the theater did is that they invited us into the community, and that community meant that as playwrights we got to speak to other playwrights who were in the same stages of the process as I was. I think that we so often write in isolation and we struggle with ideas in isolation, but with this particular commission we were invited to sit around a table at these convenings that were held and present our work and talk about our struggles and talk about the things that we had learned through our research. And there were also tools that were provided for us if we got stumped. There were historians who were made available. There were other resources that were made available. And so I felt really supported, not just by the theater, but by the other playwrights who were part of this commissioning process. Well, I think for me the convening was really helpful because I was able to share my ideas with other playwrights and get feedback and respond to questions that they had, and those questions really help expand the way in which I was approaching my research and thinking about the play. So often we don't get that feedback until we have a script, and it was really interesting to get feedback at a really nascent stage in the development of the play, which I think sent me in directions that I might not otherwise have gone. It's really fascinating to sit with a group of smart playwrights. It's also really intimidating and a little bit scary, because every idea I thought, oh, that's so fabulous, that's so interesting, I can't wait to see the play. And then I thought, oh, I have to go home and write a play. And I just love the level of engagement, sort of the intellectual engagement and the rigor of the conversations that we had in the room, which is not what I expected and not what I am accustomed to when I'm sitting by myself in my office.